Okay, great. So this is our now we should be on pretty regular schedule. Um, yeah, so let's go back to we began discussing Masechet Yevamos last time. The Masechta begins in a very peculiar way. Those who have access to the Gemara, I'm just going to start with that again, just very quickly. The first Mishnah in Masechet Yevamos is already begins I'm trying to suggest, kind of in the middle, in the sense that um, the Mishnah says, or put it this way, instead of explaining what Yibum is, what the case is, what the rules are. For example, the Mishnah in the beginning of Masachet Kiddushin, which tells us that Yavama niknes b'derech echad v'kones atzma b'beis drachim, that the a Yavama is acquired through Yibum and extricates themselves from Yibum through Chalitza or Misas Hayavam. This is the Mishnah on Daf Yud Daled Amud Aleph. We have it here on our Makomos on the second to last page, on page 7. Mishnah says, Aisha niknes begimel drachim, kones atzma b'shtei drachim, niknes bekesef, b'shtar, b'bia, bekesef, b'shamei omer b'dinar, b'shavat dinar, b'sil omer b'pruta, b'shavat pruta, kami pruta, and so on. B'kones atzma b'gat, b'yisa habal. Then the Mishnah concludes, Hayavama niknes b'bia, b'kones atzma b'chalitza, u'b'misa sayava. That a case of Yibum, if a man dies and he leaves no children, the idea that his brother, would be obligated to marry his, ex, or not ex, his wife, his almana. That's stated very explicitly in the Mishnah in Masechet Kiddushin on the Beis Amud Aleph, even though mostly the Mishnah is referring to Kiddushin. And the Mishnah also explains that there's something called chalitza, which extricates one from the zika, from the, connection to yibum, and there's something called misas hayabam if the yabam dies. So the point is that would have been a good enough place to start, and there are probably other options as well. Instead, the Mishnah here begins in a puzzling manner by telling us that Chamesh Asrei Nashim, this is Beis Amud Aleph in Masachet Yevamos, that there are 15 women who are potros tzoraseim v'tzoros tzoraseim min hachalitza min hayibum ad sof ha'olam, which basically means that if there's a yibum situation, meaning a man dies, he has no children, let's say he has more than one wife, back in the biblical period, right, a man could be married more than once. So if he is has multiple wives, but one of the wives is also a close relationship to him, so that she's not a candidate for Yibum. Like, for example, if you have two brothers, so let's say Ruvain and Shimon. Let's say Ruvain married Shimon's daughter, which is permissible. A man can marry his niece. So if Ruvain married his niece and two other women, and then Ruvain died, so now there are 3 candidates for Yibum, the niece and 2 others. But since the niece is in the mix, therefore, there is no Yibum to any of those wives. That's what this Mishnah says. Chamesh Esrei Nashim, there are 15 relationships that potros tzoraseim v'tzoros tzoraseim and achalitza and Yibum ad sof ha'olam. Elohein, the first example is Bito, his daughter. So I don't want to get, again, deeply into it right now, but the point is that if one of the candidates for Yibum is a prohibited relationship, then not only is that woman excluded from Yibum, but even the other wives in the mix, they're also excluded from Yibum. They're called tsaros. The word tsara means like a rival. So the co-wives are also excluded from Yibum. So it's just interesting that the Mishnah begins with, welcome to the Chazan. The Mishnah begins with this halacha, and that, with an exception when Yibum doesn't apply, instead of beginning to explain what Yibum is. So I was wondering why that is. I'm going to get back to that. The second thing I was wondering about is what the first Tosas Ishanim in Masechet Yevamos speaks about. So if you look at the Tosas Shonim on the side of the page, on Daf Beis Amud Aleph, it says Chamesh Esrei Nashim Potros Tsarosehem. Says the Tosas Shonim, Yesh Makshim, there are those who ask, Amai Matchil Seder Nashim Yevamos. So in the tradition of our tradition and the Rambam's tradition and the Tosei Shanim's tradition, not everybody's tradition, but in the more dominant tradition, the order of Mishnayos is Yevamos, and then Ksuvos, and then actually just make sure Yevamos, Ksuvos, right, and then comes
Kiddushin,
and then the Darim Nazir, Sota, etc. So the leadoff Mishnayos in Seder Nashim is Masachet Yevamos. And the question is, why should that be? After all, if we're talking about probability, right, what is the likelihood of encountering a Yibum case? Much, much, much less than certainly a marriage case. Marriages happen all the time, Baruch Hashem. Divorces happen much more often than Yibum does too. Divorce is a sad circumstance, but as we discussed last year, sometimes a necessary one. But there are many, many, many more divorces than there are Yibums. Yibum has to be exactly the right circumstances for it to be Chal. So why would Seder Nashim begin with Masechet Yevamos over that of Kiddushin, Ksuvos? Kiddushin deals with Erisin, Ksuvos deals with Nisuin, Gittin deals with Gittin. So that's what Tosas Shanim asks. And Tosas says, Yesh Makshim, Amai Matchil Seder Nashim Bivamos, Va'adchule Puranusa Lo Matchilinan. Also, it's a sad case. The husband dies. Normally, we try to avoid sad topics, right? Sometimes we can't get away from it. The Adarabba, Hayalanu Lahatchil Kiddushin Uksuvos Vigitin. We should have begun first with Kiddushin, because that's the earliest stage of a marriage. Then Ksuvos, that's the Nisuin part, and then Gerushin, V'achakach Yevamos. Says the Tosas Shana gives three answers. V'nira mishum dichsiv haya emunas itecha chosen Yeshuos v'amru itecha ze seder moed chosen ze seder nashim v'imkein seder nashim hu basar seder moed u'mesayim b'masechet moed katan dehave puranusa l'kach hitchil seder nashim b'masechet yevamos. This is a kind of a curious answer. The first answer of Tosas Shanim is that Seder Nashim follows Seder Moed, and the end of Seder Moed is Masechet Moed Katan. Moed Katan deals with Avelos. So if we're talking about Avelos, or we're talking about Yibum, and we go from Avelos to talking about Yibum, which of course is a case where there is a death of a husband. That's one answer. Umasmich Puranusa la Puranusa. So we connect, one sad story with another sad story. Could I read in Parakashutfin? The Masmich Malachim, the Sofe Puranus, Liyirmia, the Kule Puranus. Inami, a second answer. The Farish Tchila, Ezo Isha Asura, the Ezo Isha Muteres, the Choser Mefarish, Kula Mila Dinashim. Maybe the first thing to establish in Seder Nashim is which women are candidates for marriage and everything else, and which are erva, which are considered to be illicit relationships that are excluded. So the Mishnah in Yevamo, then this Mishnah, of course, is perfect because it starts off Chamesh Esrei Nashim Potros Tzoraseim. These are all cases of erva. Okay. The Od Yesh our third answer, Mishum Dihi Mitzvah Rishona She'ira B'Nashim K'desiv B'Tamar Ba Elesha Sachicha V'Yabei Mosa. The first marital obligation that we find in the Torah is the story that we're going to be speaking quite a bit about, and that's the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Yehuda told his son Onan, when Er died, and Er was married to Tamar. So then Yehuda said to Onan that ye should be miyabim, your brother's wife. So that's the first command, right? To of a marriage
But
of
doesn't the Rambam and others say that until Matan Torah, whatever was said in the Torah really doesn't count as the real commandment for us?
well, that okay. I mean, that's yes and no. Especially we'll see when it comes to Yibum. The Torah does use the expression of Yibum here. He said to him, V'yabemosa.
And it wasn't. It's also
In
not the same kind of Yibum that we would do. That
what?
logically.
Well, that's what we'll discuss. We'll discuss whether that's true or not. That's a big issue, especially in the Ramban, which we're going to discuss extensively. Whether the story of Yehuda and Tamar is really a regular Yibum story or not. We'll get to it. Anyway, these are three answers. These are three interesting answers. The Rambam has a fourth answer in his Hakdama to Pirush Mishnayos. The Rambam says, well, first we begin Seder Nashim and a compulsory marriage, and then we talk about voluntary marriages. Not really compulsory, but meaning it's it's an obligation and
Commanded.
and if he were to consummate this marriage, it would work. So the Rambam says an ishus balkarcha, it comes before an ishus beratza. So you have four answers. There are more answers out there. I'm going to suggest a different answer, both for the reason that we begin the Masechta with this Mishnah, which seems to be talking about, the exemptions rather than the rule, and why Yevamos is the beginning of Seder Nashim. And in order to explain that, I want to talk about the psukim that are the background to this as well. So if you look at the Marmakomos that we have on page 1 of the Marmakomos, let's start with the psukim in Parshas Kiteitzet. I think we began with this last time, but it was 2 weeks ago, so I'm catching us up before we move on. So the Parsha in Yevamos begins Ki Yeshvu Achim Yaakov. You have here on page 1, the very beginning of the Marmakomos. Ki Yeshvu Achim Yaakov, when the brothers live together, right? When brothers live together, Umeis Echad Mehem, and one of them dies, Uben Ein Lo, and he doesn't have a child, right? Losia Eshes Hameis Achutza Izar, his wife, the wife of the mace, should not be excluded. She shouldn't be treated as an outsider who, whose future depends on a relationship with an ish zar, with a non-family member. Rather, Yavama, right, a sister-in-law, right, Yavo Aleha, Ulakach, the brother-in-law is obligated to take steps, Yavo Aleha Ulakacha Lo Leisha V'Yibma, to marry her, Lakacha Lo Leisha, by like Kikach Ish, V'Yibma, and to be miyabem her. So that's the pasuk. So several things to say. I want to discuss some of these psukim. Let's begin with the first pasuk. So it's peculiar that the psukim begin in such a broad way. Ki yeshvu achim yachdav, when brothers live together. And the Ibn Ezra zeroes in on it. Ibn Ezra says, like, what? And if they didn't live together, if they lived in different countries or different states or different cities, it would make a difference. What do you mean, ki yeshvu achim yachdav? The Meshech Chachma says, is also troubled by this beginning, but, he has an alternative. He says, in the context of Yerusha, inheritance, so the Torah says, Adam, kimes Adam, ubein ein lo, right? If a man dies and he doesn't have children, and this is what you do. You should have started in a similar vein. Here, a man dies, he doesn't have a child. This is what you do. What do you mean, ki yeshvu? And then it says, 1 second, it says, umeis echad mehem, and one of them dies. Like it's a random thing. Why not zero in on one person who dies, who has brothers, who doesn't have children? I mean, it's just a strange way to introduce the concept. I'm sorry, you were saying?
Didn't they know what we all learned that this is meant to exclude the brother who's not wasn't alive when he was alive? Isn't that why the
Yeah.
Yeshu? I mean, they knew this
Yes.
obviously.
So that,
Uh,
yes, but that just begs the question further. So let me explain. So the answer is if you look at Rashi, Pasuk Hey, Rashi's quoting the Gemara on the Gemara Yevamos Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, where the Gemara says, Ki yesh ruachim yaktav, shahoysa lahem yeshiva achas ba'olam. They had one, they lived together. Prat le'eshes achiv shelo ya ba'olamo. To
mhm.
exclude a brother who didn't coexist with the mace. What does that mean? So, for example, let's say Ruvain was married and didn't have children, and let's say Ruvain had two brothers, okay, Shimon and Levi, and let's say Levi was only born after Ruvain died, meaning
Depends according
Ruvain's parents, had a child after Ruvain died. So Levi and Ruvain were never in the world together. That's called Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo. So based on these words, Ki Yeshu Achim Yachtav, we learn that if two brothers didn't coexist, then the wife that is Omedes Liibum is
no.
cannot be Misyabemes to the Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo. And not only that, but the Mishnah says, this is a Mishnah that says 15 women are Potros Tsoraseim and so on. Potros. Number 14 is Achiv Shelo. If you look back in the Mishnah, and you turn the page for a minute, the Mishnah lists all the arayos.
Next to the
If you look at the first line of the second page, the Eshes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, and the last one is, by the way, is Kalaso, which is also interesting. So what do you mean Eshes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo? Exactly this, meaning a wife of his brother, but of a brother that he never coexisted with, cannot be misyavenis. So that's what these words, ki yeshu achim yachtav, that the brothers live together, doesn't mean they live in the same town, doesn't mean that they got along together. It
coexisted
means
at
that
the
they
same time.
coexisted. What?
They coexisted in the same time frame.
Yeah, but I want to say that begs the question: first of all, how common is it even within Yibum that there's an achiv shelo haya ba'olamo? Very rare, right? Because remember, you have to have a married brother, and you have to be talking about a brother who was never born, until after he died.
The clarification, is this a brother only from the Av?
Yes, all the brothers in Yibum, we'll get to that in a minute.
So in theory, if the father remarried later on and he had a child, this case could exist.
No, it could have. Of course, it could happen. That's not. I'm only saying it's not the typical case. So the first words of the Parsha of Yibum are dedicated to an extraordinary case. That's number one. They are. So I just want to know why. And let me say it in a different way. The halacha itself, Eino Omer Ela Darsheni. What do we care? Why do they have to coexist at the same time? From a biological point of view, the diversity of talking about, the DNA is the same, assuming it has the same parents or the same father. It doesn't make it the biological candidacy of this brother, is the same whether they coexisted or didn't coexist.
It could be a Torah that says that the obligation is of a brother.
I'm getting there.
You could think of Svaras. It's not that hard to think of a
I'm not saying it's hard. I'm just trying to lead us there. So what I'd like to explain is, meaning I'm trying to show two things. Number one, it's a strange beginning. Number two, it's there for a rare case. Number three, the rare case itself can be explained, but it certainly isn't obvious. Mostly, if we're talking about a brother, and we're talking about somebody who's an objective brother. If it's a brother from the father's side, that means he has he's a child of the father. He has the DNA of the father. None of that is altered kihuzeh by whether or not the two of them coexisted or not. But what is altered, exactly what you said, is something else. And this is why I think that Yibum begins with this rare case and with these words, and explains many other things as well. And that is the first thing the Torah wants us to understand when it comes to Yibum is that when people marry into a family, um, when people marry each other, they marry into families as well. I made this point in the past. Rav Shamshin Fall Hirsch mentioned this in the past. Has a good ha'ara. I'm sure he's not the first person to mention it. And that is that the way we signify a bride and a groom, chassan and a kala, is with the words chassan kala. And chassan kala really mean a son-in-law and a daughter-in-law. So when you think about it, it's a very, remarkable thing. We have these two people; they're marrying each other. Who's marrying who? The daughter-in-law is marrying the son-in-law. Not even the son and the daughter, but the daughter and son-in-law, which is a way of highlighting, right, that there's a merging of families, and that there's a responsibility that each one has to integrate into the other person's family. So, in a way, the first words of Yibum, which also teach us a very remarkable halacha, highlight this perspective. Because when you think about it, if two people were just marrying each other, it was just a bilateral relationship, right? Then of course it terminates when one of the parties is no longer there, when somebody dies, right? So if Nebuch, if the husband dies, then the marriage is over. But in the context of Yibum, as the pasuk itself says, Lotia Esha Sames Achutza Liizar. Normally we say that a woman in a marriage is kones atzma b'misa saval. When the husband dies, the marriage is over. However, here in Yibum, she's called Esha Sames. She's the wife of the deceased. And that's not necessarily only a description based on the past. In some respects, in the case of Yibum, because there are no children, and the Zika of the Yibum, in some respect, even now she's the Esha Sameh. So we'll see how far we take this. But that can only be because the marriage isn't just between a husband and a wife, right? It is something that encompasses also the legacy of the future, having a family potentially. And even more important than that, it's kiyeshvu achim yaktov. It's joining a clan. It's becoming a son-in-law and a daughter-in-law. All these things. So if the Torah wanted to explain that Yibum is an ultimate expression of family responsibility and the expansiveness of marriage and family, the best way would be to highlight it with ki yeshvu achim yachtav, the words, and the halacha, which is an achiv shaloya balamo, who objectively never knew this wife. Again, you could have, just to make it clear, you could have brothers who never met a wife,
They live apart.
or brothers who never met or who rarely met each other or never met each other, but at least structurally they were living in the same world. It's possible, but that's so the Torah draws a line in a very objective place. But what the Torah is telling us is that achiv shelo ayabolamo, who structurally has no connection with his brother, no real relationship couldn't have with his brother or his sister-in-law, right? So there's no shaychos, there's no kiyeshu. In that case, there's no yibum, even though the DNA is the same. Mashal Amad Averdom. I'll give you an example. Look on page, if you look in the Mar Makomos, look at the Kuf Mem Beis Somad Beis. This is the bottom of page 7. On the bottom of page 7, I have a little Mar Makom that says the following. Ben Shanolad Lachar Misasaviv, a child that is born after the father dies, Eino Mamai B'Chelek HaBechora. My time of Yod V'Lo Rachmana V'Haleka. Besura masno haki, but pumbedisa masno haki. In pumbedisa, they had a little bit of a different version of this. Omer Mar Dure, I'll explain in a moment. Mar Bered Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava, Bechor Shanolad La'achar Misas Aviv, a Bechor who was born after the father died. How's that possible? I'll explain in a moment. Einonoto Pishnayim doesn't get a double chelik in the
Only
Bechor.
one of people who died
My
before
time, Yakir Rachmana Valesa the Yakir. What?
He's the only one if he was born after the father died.
No, twins.
Don't have to share with anybody.
Twins.
Oh, okay.
So what's the case? Let's say the father, the mother is pregnant with twins or triplets or quadruplets or quintuplets. It doesn't matter. There is a Bechor, and Nebuch, the children are born after the father's death.
A rare case.
Yeah, it's a very rare case. So, but the chiddush of the limud is that since the Torah uses the expression Yakir Omer Achmana, that the father has to recognize the Bechor, you can't recognize him because you never knew him because they didn't exist at the same time. It's very similar to what we've just been talking about, right? Achiv shelo yabo lamo, and here we're talking about a Bechor, she lo haya ba'olamo shalaviv. So the double chelek of the Bechorah does not apply to a Bechor who was born after the father died. Why? It's the same DNA. He's still the Bechor. There's a lot of evidence to establish, not for now, that the role of, and this is going to help us in our next little point as well, or big point, and that is that the role of a Bechor in the family is not just a technicality, but the Bechor symbolically kind of, is he's the responsible party among the siblings. He is his father's, first, Memalamoko. So what we're being told is, but if they didn't, breathe the same air, if they didn't coexist, then that special relationship of a Bechor, again, they say in the name of the Meshach Chachma that the reason a Bechor gets Bishnayim is because he's the one who made his father into a father. So, but this one made his father into a father after the father was no longer alive.
Only paternal, it's only paternal?
Yeah. We'll get that in a second. Anyways, so the example I'm trying to give is where there are some dinim that depend on like the biology, the DNA, and a Bechor born after his father's death is still a Bechor. And a brother born after, his brother's death is still a brother. However, whenever the halacha deals with, a projected relationship, not just a structural relationship, then the coexistence and the potential of having actual contact and a real relationship becomes a factor. So just like Bechor, Shenolad La'achar Misas Aviv, doesn't have Dinei Bechor, Bechor, Shenolad La'achar Misas Achiv, right, is Mufka from Yibum. So I think that's a perfect place to begin, even though it's a very rare case. I'm sorry?
Do they have to have chalitza?
Oh, no. The I mean the Achiv Shelo Yabalamo?
Yeah.
You're asking?
Yes.
No, he is. I mean, she excluded from Yibam and Chalitza. All the cases of the Mishnah. All the cases of the Mishnah and Beis Amud Aleph are excluded from Yibam and Chalitza. We will see later on. There are cases where there's Chalitza and no Yibam. Question is whether those cases are ever Minat Torah or not. We'll get to that. So so now I'm trying to explain, according to my suggestion at least, that this is a perfect beginning. Not because it just, it's Megala Milsa of this rare case. The rare case highlights something about the nature of Yibum. Namely, Yibum works off of an expanded notion of family. Eishes Hames, Ki Yeshvu Achim Yachdav, Chasan and Kala. So this is that's number one. Number two, there's a massive argument, we're going to discuss it, whether or not, normally a sister-in-law, the wife of a brother, is an erva. And all of a sudden in Yibum, it's a mitzvah. So there's a big debate among the Rishonim already, whether this is what we call hutra or dechuya, meaning the overriding obligation, lahakim la'achiv shem b'Yisrael, overrides the prohibition, or the prohibition of Eishes Ach was never said when there are no children, and in the context of lahakim la'achiv shem. That's called hutra. One is called dechuya. Dechuya means docha, mean you override. There's a greater priority here, so we allow you to violate something in order to accomplish something greater.
Wouldn't you equate this to like Milo, where the pasuk says directly that you should be overriding? So it's really not the regular hutra argument. Because here you have.
So we'll talk. It's probably a little bit. I mean, the question of hutra dechuya comes up in a lot of different contexts. Pikuach nefesh, Mila b'Shabbos, Heter Melecha so-called Nefesh, Karbonos on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It comes up in a lot of contexts when you could be distinguished. Tumah Hutra B'Tzibor, Tumah Dechuya B'Tzibor. Many examples of it, but we'll say broadly. We'll discuss it. Okay. Anyways, the bigger idea I want to explain is as follows. So the view that says that Yibum overrides Eishes Ach, that's it's a clash, it's a power struggle. The benefit of Yibum is given priority. However, what about the view that it's hutra? So the idea may be that what makes Eishes Ach particularly egregious and reprehensible, namely the disloyalty to the brother, right? But if it's lahakim la'achiv shem b'Yisrael, if it's about securing that same brother's legacy, and the way Rabbeinu Babchaye says it, we'll see it later on, umdim daito shal ha'ach, the brother would want this if it ensures his legacy. So then that's another way of looking at hutra, meaning not just that technically, legally, you don't violate because Isra Eishes Ach was not said in b'makom Yibum, but the circumstances of Yibum take what would be a terrible violation, and they, for the very same reason, they turned it into a huge mitzvah. Instead of betraying your brother, right, you're doing an unbelievable chesed for your brother. So that's ki yeshvu achim yachdav. The word yachdav is also significant. If you look at the Rashi on Yachdav, Rashi says, and this is based on the Gemara in, we're going to look at this Gemara in a minute, the Gemara in Chaf Dalid Amud Aleph in Yevamos. Yachdav means hamiyuchadim b'nachala, prat la'achiv mina'en. This is what you were asking me about several times. Yibum only applies to brothers on the father's side, not to brothers on the mother's side. So it could be because of Nachla. Nachla, Yerusha, goes through the father's side, mostly. At least first it goes to the father's side, not the mother's side. And the reason for that is because of Yichus, and, like Kohen, Levi, Israel goes to the father. Shvatim, Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun, all that goes through the father.
But actually,
so Nachla also
Jewish goes to the mother.
Kedushas Yisrael goes through the mother, and Mishpacha, in terms of Yichus, goes through the father. So, so the Sefer Batim, when he quotes this halacha, he said Hamiyuchadim Benachla. Hamiyuchadim Benachla means Prat La'achim Bena'im, meaning Yibum only applies to brothers on the father's side. But you could say that, maybe because the Yerusha part plays an important role, and we'll see that according to Rabbeinu Babchaye and others, it really does. However, Sefer Batim says no. The nachla part is just an indication. The real idea is the idea that the very pithy, statement of the Gemara. The Gemara says, "Mishpacha sav kriya mishpacha, mishpacha seim lo kriya mishpacha," meaning there are two categories of kurva.
We don't go by that today, do we?
Oh, you better not tell it to your wife.
Well, let me explain what I mean by it. There are two categories of kurva. One kurva is called she'er basar. She'er basar applies in both directions, but on the man's side and on the woman's side. Relatives through your mother are she'er basar. However, when it comes to mishpacha, that refers to yichus, what I was talking about before. Whether you're a Kohen, a Levi, or Yisrael, whether you're from Shevet, Ruvain, Yehuda, or Zvulun, that depends on your father. So when we say mishpachas ha'av, kriya mishpacha, we're talking about yichus. But what the Gemara is telling us is that yibum is a din in yichus, mishpacha. It's on the formal side of the mishpacha, not on the individual relative side. And the reason for that is, same reason, ki yeshu achim yachdav. Right. In some sense, the father's family is legally dominant. Again, the mother is koveya kedushas Yisrael, but the father's koveya, which shem mishpacha or beis sav you belong to. Yibum depends on that second halacha.
Well, since the legacy is from the father and the child perpetuates the legacy, so that's why it's only from the father.
Yeah, exactly. It's lahakim la'akiv shem b'Yisrael. And it's also about, maybe nachala, and therefore it all depends on the father's side. But what this establishes, again, is that we're not just trying to find a candidate to do yibum. The yesod of yibum is the broader concept of mishpacha. So going back to I'm not going to explain yet why this is the first Mishnah in Yevamos is the perfect place to start Masechet Yevamos. I haven't explained that yet. But I think I already have explained maybe why it is that Masechet Yevamos is the perfect beginning of Seder Nashim. Because even though it's a much more unusual case, it's a rarer case, and it's rule breaking in many respects. But the rule breaking of Yibum, according to a certain perspective, is really a testament to the more expansive concept of mishpacha, of family. As I said before, for Bnei Noach, probably family or marriage means a husband and a wife, and it's a bilateral relationship. But for Klal Yisrael, it's the integration of families, and it's the added family responsibility, ki yeshu achim yachdav, that is the basis for Yibum. So in that respect, one could explain that if you really want to, highlight like the most aspirational, evidence about, family ties through marriage, it's through Yibum.
If you look at it from another perspective, you can't have Yibum until there was a Kedushin before that by the brother.
No, of course. But still what I'm saying
in other words, chronologically, there has to be a Kedushin before you...
of course. And that's why the question's a good question. It's more common, it's sequentially there. But the point is there are certain aspects of expanded family responsibility and family ties that actually, are attested to in Yibum more than anything else. And therefore, if you want to emphasize, so that's my suggestion. Okay. Let's continue with this.
One point, if I could add, according to this,
Sure.
then one would have to take the position, and there's an argument about it later on, that Yibum is definitely the preferred and over Chalitza, because...
Right, but even the view that Chalitza is preferred in a way, let's say take the Abba Shol version of that. So Abba Shol and Daf Lamed Tesvav Beis says Chalitza is preferred. But the reason he thinks Chalitza is preferred is because his standards for Yibum are so high.
But there's also previous to that the question as to whether they're equal. you have a choice, or whether Yibum is first.
Yeah, we'll talk about all that.
So I'm saying, according to what you're saying, one would lean towards the fact that Yibum is the preferred, because
It is preferred. What I'm saying is that even according to Abba Shaul, Yibum is really preferred, because in the Psukim, Yibum is preferred. If you look at the Psukim, Ki yesh rachim yachtav v'meis echad, v'bein ein lo, right? Lo ti'eshes hameis achutz l'ishar, yivamo yavo alehu l'kacha lo l'isha v'yibma. The first thing you're supposed to do is Yibum. V'hoya b'chor asher teled Yaakov, we'll get this in a minute. Al shem achiv hameis lo yimachesh shemo Yisrael, v'im lo yachbot ha'ish l'kachas es yivimto, v'olso yivimto ha'sharos es kenim v'amar mein yivami l'hakiv l'hakiv shem Yisrael lo ava yibmi, then you do chalitza. So in the sequence, now Abba Shaul said chalitza is preferable, but only for practical reasons, because in order to do Yibum properly, you have to have lishma.
And in his time,
it can't be, she's beautiful, she's wealthy, she's efficient. It's got to be, I'm doing this for my brother. So since Abba Shaul has a very high standard of accomplishing Yibum properly, the result is that he thinks that it's better, most people, it's better to do chalitza. But not because chalitza is superior, but because chalitza is safer. So the principle that Yibum is preferable is clear in the order and the language of the psukim, and it's even true according to Abba Shaul.
It's not that anybody said that chalitza was preferable, but wasn't that an opinion that it's a choice, basically?
No, of course it's a choice.
That it's an equal mitzvah, so to speak, either way.
Yeah, we'll get to that also. Maybe, yeah.
Okay. But Rabbi, ki yeshvu shnei achim yachdav.
Not shnei, ki yeshvu achim yachdav.
I thought it said shnei achim. Okay, then another. So what happens? Let's say it's 4 brothers together. Who gets to do the Yibum?
So that's our next little stop. So look at pasuk. Hold on for one more minute. I'm going to turn to. You can already turn to the Gemara on Chaf Dalid Amud Aleph. But first, I'm going to read the pasuk. So the next pasuk is V'haya habachor asher teleid yakum al shem achiv v'ameis v'lo yimachesh shemo Yisrael. So the simple reading of the pasuk, and this is the way the Ibn Ezra reads it, Reb Sajagon reads it, the Rashbam reads it. If you're just reading the words, what would you say it means? V'haya b'chor asher teleid, the child that is born, the next child that is born from this new marriage, from this Yibum, Yakum al Shem Achiv Hameis, he will stand in for whatever that means, get the name of or stand in for the deceased. V'lo yimachesh shemo Yisrael, and the deceased's name will not be obliterated from Klal Yisrael. However, that's a simple reading of the pasuk. That's how the Rashbam, the Rasag, the Ibn Ezra, that's how they read it. Look at Rashi.
It's also consistent with Yehuda's comment to Tama.
What?
It's also consistent with Yehuda's instructions to Tama. And he said to his son, who didn't listen to him, that you need to do this in order to perpetuate your brothers. And the Torah said very clearly he didn't want to perpetuate.
Right. But all I'm saying is that the word bechor here, the pshat, refers to the child. Asher teleid, that is born, right? Yakum al shem achiv hameis. If you look at Rashi, I'm going to show you the Gemara inside. It comes from the Gemara. We look at Rashi pasuk vav. V'haya bechor, Rashi says it doesn't mean the oldest child, the child. Who does it mean? Chazan just asked me who does the Yibum, right? If there's more than one brother. Gadol ha'achim.
The oldest brother.
The oldest brother.
Okay.
1 second. Hu miyabe mosa. Asher teleid doesn't mean the child either. It means prat la'ailanus sheni yoledes. As long as the mother is capable of bearing children, yakum al shem achiv, ze sheyabem es ishto yitol nachalas hameis b'nechsei aviv. It doesn't mean to call him, by the name of the deceased. It means that the yavam, not how you call the child, but that the yavam, the brother who is miyabem, Yitol nachlos hameis b'nechseaviv. He gets the portion of the mace in their father's estate. A totally different reading than the pshat, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So now look at the Gemara on Chav Daled Amud Aleph, where this is fleshed out, but it's very important to see what really is going on here. So we're going to look at an
And also give another
Amud.
reason for Abba Shaul to have been concerned, because now there's a financial possibility for the brother to want to
That's
do.
true. Right. Another Lishma issue. Yeah. So look at the Mishnah. Everybody turn. If I'm assuming everybody has access to a Gemara.
Yeah.
I'm going to get one. Okay, forgive me, Rabbi, but you can continue. I can hear you from far.
Okay, great. So the Mishnah on Chaf Daled Amud Aleph, 24a.
Mitzvah
Chaf
Bagadol
Dalet Amud Aleph.
Chaf Daled Amud Aleph.
Chaf
Mitzvah
Dalet.
Bagadol Yavev.
Chaf Daled Amud Aleph.
Okay.
So the Mishnah says mitzvah begadol liyaveh. The mitzvah is for the oldest brother to do the yibum. However, im kidei makatan zacha. If the younger brother, jumps the gun and he's miyabim before the older brother, it works. Zacha. Interesting.
Even though there's a not just an Isser question, there's a Choshen Mishpat question here, because
like a schar mitzvah question.
no, there's a financial issue here. So he's stealing from the brother, maybe. No.
Oh! I didn't realize it. Yeah, of course. In that respect, correct. Okay, so mitzvah begadol yabim. We'll have to see what this discrepancy is. By the way, mitzvah begadol yabim means the oldest brother that's available, or if not him, then you go to the next older brother, the next older brother, the next older brother. How does it work? So this is a machlokas between the Rambam and most other Rishonim, the Ravid, Rashi, Tosfot. The Rambam is of the opinion that when the Mishnah says that, mitzvah begadol yavim, he meant the oldest available brother. And after that, they're all equal.
Regardless of wives.
No, it has nothing to do with wives, one or another. But I'm saying, meaning if
No, in other words, the oldest from the same wife that the brother came from, or the oldest.
No. The oldest brother from the father.
Uh-huh.
Let's say there's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and Yisachar, and they're in that age order. So what I'm saying is, let's say Reuven dies. So the oldest brother is Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and Yisachar, right? Let's say Shimon's the oldest brother.
Right.
So the gadol, Sheba'achim, was supposed to be Miyabim, is certainly Shimon. Let's say for some reason Shimon is not available. He's out of town. He's not a candidate, whatever it is. So is the next candidate Levi, and then Yehuda, and then Yisachar? Or once you don't have Shimon, it doesn't make a difference. It's the oldest. So the Rambam is of the opinion that there's special yichus to the oldest brother. But once you're not dealing with the oldest brother, it doesn't make a difference anymore. And the Ravid and Rashi and Tosas and most of the Rishonim say that's not true. There's a hierarchy. The older it goes in age order. Okay. Either way.
Where do they base? What do they base it on?
What do you mean?
You say the Ravid, and all of them they say it goes one by one by one by one. Oh. Where do they get it from?
Well, how do you know that the older brother? The answer is the next.
A little bit more logical, maybe.
No, look at the next line of the Gemara. The Gemara says, "Tan Rabbanan," right? V'hayaha bechor. The pasuk says bechor.
Mikan
shemitzvah begadol liyavim. So the way that the Rambam read it was. We're going to get to in a second.
A girl could be born first. He may not be the bechor.
Or let's say the bechor is the one who dies.
Right. I didn't think about that.
Or as you say, there is no bechor. So this is what I want to discuss for a few minutes. But before we get to that, but by the way, the machlokes between the Rambam and most of the other Rishonim is Bechor means here the oldest. So it means the oldest or means in age order? That's the question. Okay, we'll get back to it. So the Gemara says, ah, but what does that mean? That they're learning the pasuk? V'haya bechor doesn't refer to the child; it refers to the brother, right? Then the pasuk says, "Asher teleid." Prat line. This is what Rashi was quoting from. Instead of Asher teleid meaning the child that is born, it means Asher teleid, meaning a candidate for Yibum has to be someone who has the ability
to give birth.
birth.
It's a bit of a tortured reading of the pasuk, no?
It is, which makes it even more interesting. It makes it more striking. She'ein yoledes, right? Practically, island of she'ein yoledes, and then Yakum al shem achiv lenachala. What does that mean? Ato omer lenachala. Does it mean, the brother will inherit the nachala of his deceased brother whose wife he's marrying?
Or to be mekal.
Or does it refer to the name of the child?
But if
Yosef?
you follow this,
Meaning, if the
then
mace's name was Yosef, Koronoso Yosef.
if you
Yochanan?
follow this, then you lose the whole concept that the reason for the Yibum is to perpetuate the brother's legacy. Because if you read this Drush version of the translation of the pasuk, you've lost all that.
Okay. So we'll get to that in a second. But I intend to address that. So what is the alternative with the name? Yosef, Koronoso Yosef. Yochanan, Koronoso Yochanan. Nemar Khan, Yakom al Shem Achiv. The Nemar Lahalan regarding Ephraim and Menashe, al Shem Achehem Yikaru Benachalasam. Mashama Amur Lahalan Nachala. Afshem ho amur la'alan nachala, afshem ho amur kan le'nachala. So we're reading this pasuk according to the Gemara in a very, as you say, tortured way. Instead of being the child should be called after the name of the mace, we're saying the brother, the oldest brother preferably, right? If the wife is capable of bearing children, then the brother, through his Yibum, will be entitled to the Nachala of the mace from their common father.
So there's no Yibum to an older woman?
We'll get to it. That's an interesting question. It's Kana, it's called. Yeah. And
right.
Akara also. We'll discuss it. V'lo yimachesh shemo, prat l'saris sheshmo machui. Lo yimachesh shemo means the name will not be obliterated. That's to exclude somebody who, if the brother who died himself didn't have the ability to bear children. Okay. Then the Gemara says, Amar Rabba. This is now it gets very interesting. I mean, it's already interesting. Afagav the b'chol Torah kula ain't mikra yotze midei pshuto. Even though in kol Torah kula, you can't ignore the pshat. Even if you interpret Torah Shabbat Peh, you still have to, you can't ignore also the simple reading of the psukim. But hacha, where we're interpreting everything the opposite, right? We're saying instead of the child and naming the child after the mace, we're talking about the brother, right? And Nachala and all that. But hacha asoi gzera shava afikte mipashte legamri. Wow. So this is already unusual. We're saying that, not only are we interpreting the psukim here according to Torah Shebaal Peh, not Torah Shebichsav, the pshat, but it's a rare case where we are, particularly ignoring the pshat. We'll get to it in a moment. So the Gemara says, the ilav gzera shava, if not for gzera shava, yikarei, havamina shame mamish, you would have thought that we're talking about what name you give to the child. Leman kamaza rachmana, who would the Torah have been speaking to? Li yavam, if the Torah was talking to the yavam, it should have said yakim al shem achicha. You should, get the name of your brother. Miboilai. That's what it should have said. Ila beidina, if we're talking about the naming, that's an interesting idea. Anyway, why would you think that the Bezdin would give a name here? Okay, I mean, it's Klal Yisrael's business, not just the family. Yakom al Shem Achi Aviv Miboile. Right? It just said, oh, to Bezdin, give this lad, this little child, the name of his uncle. Says the Gemara, maybe what it means, the Torah said, Libezdin, Imrule Yavam, tell the Yavam, Yakum al Shem Achiv. Tell the Yavam that the child should be called after his brother.
But okay. Is it the Nachala? Is it the Nachla that they're talking about Yakum Shem Achiv?
But the answer, that's what it would have been if it had been the name. But the maskana, the conclusion is that it's about the Nachla. So the Gemara says, El asai gzerashava fikta legamri, hashad amr skrab begadol, right? Ksiv. Ema bechor liyabim, pashud lo liyabim. So now the Gemara gets down to even a bit. So number one, we have a puzzle. Why is this pasuk written Lifi Pshuta one way, and the Torah Shabbal Peh understands it completely differently?
In this particular case, we're diverting completely from the question as to whether this follows Yehuda with Tamar and Onain, and
we'll get back to that.
Because there he went eldest first when he made the decision who should take the, and it says clearly, I just grabbed the Chumash, well, it says, he's making it very clear, but he also went to the next oldest child. So I mean, if we were going to follow Yehuda, it would
no, remember that, I mean, Er died.
Right.
He's the mace. Then there are two other children, there are two brothers.
And he went to the next eldest first.
Yeah, that's fine.
So why don't we use that as a rule of thumb? Then that must be the way it should be.
Well, what do we need that for? We have a post Matan Torah pasuk in Kitetse that says the Bechor.
No, because there's some argument as to whether that means the oldest or it means we discussed before. No.
The argument is like this. Let's say there are four brothers, three of them candidates. So everybody agrees that the oldest of the Yavam candidates.
So you're saying there's only two kids left at that point, so there was no.
Let's say there are three. Let's say there are three, and one of them is obligated, but let's say he can't do it. He can't do it. He's not in town, whatever. Right? Or he can't produce children. Now the question is the next oldest also have priority? Or once the oldest can't do it, there's no difference between the next oldest and the one after and the youngest.
By Yehuda, he went to the next one in order, and then he left the youngest. He told Tamar at that point.
No, but there were only two. There were only two candidates. It doesn't prove anything.
No, there were three brothers.
There were three brothers, but one of them died, and there are two candidates. So there's an older brother, and there's the oldest, older, and the youngest. The question of the Rambam and the Rabbi and all that.
She has no option. She can't choose anything, right? It's forced on her. Meaning, let's say she likes one brother better than the other.
Well, no, it's not her choice, but she can choose in the end not to be Misyavemis. But we'll discuss that later. Anyway, so now the Gemara is addressing a different topic. The Gemara is saying, how come the Torah uses the word Yav, how the word's Bechor, if it's not really a Bechor? We're saying Bechor means what? Gadol ha'achim. But a Gadol ha'achim isn't a Bechor. Right? Like you said, let's say there's a daughter first. Or let's say the son that dies is the Bechor. So now the Gemara is going to look for 4 or 5 different ways to try to suggest that maybe there's a difference if there's a real Bechor or just a Gadol ha'achim. Why? Because the Gemara is troubled by the language of the pasuk. Bechor has a real meaning. So look at this. The first Havamina, the Gemara says, Ema Bechor liyabim pashut lo liyabim. How do you know that the pasuk says Vahya Bechor asher teleid? maybe the only Yibum is a Bechor. That would be sensational, right? Would that make sense? Sure. Because what is a Bechor? He's a stand-in he has a special status vis-a-vis his brothers as a representative of his father. So the Gemara, we don't hold this way, but the Gemara is weighing it. The Gemara is saying maybe Yibum is only Alidei Bechor. Says the Gemara, Imke can't be, because Imke Eishes Achiv Shaloya Bolamo Demiad Rachmana Lamali. So why are they excluding a brother who didn't coexist with him? Right? Even a brother who did coexist with him, if he's not a Bechor, would be excluded. So obviously it's not limited to Bechor. Okay. Paruch Rav Acha. The Ema Lemeute Buchra Te'ima. Maybe it's coming to exclude a Bechor Le'ima as opposed to La'aba. Says the Gemara, Hu lo Matisamris. The Yibam Benachla Tala Rachmana. Benachla Mina'av V'lo Mina'im. Like we said before. Right? It mentions Nachla. Nachla is from the father's side. So obviously we're talking about a Bechor also from the father's side. So the Gemara says, Ve'ema ki'ika Bechor tiskayim mitzvah sibum. Kileka Bechor lo tiskayim mitzvah sibum. Maybe the pshat is that when there's a Bechor, there's a mitzvah of yibum, and even a pashut could accomplish it. If you know. But if there's no Bechor at all, then no one can accomplish it. Does that make sense?
If someone is married to two wives, and the first wife, one wife has a girl first, second wife has a boy first, that man has no Bechor?
Say that one more time.
He has two wives, Rachel Leah, okay? Yeah. And one of them has a girl first, and one of them has a boy first. Does that mean that man has no Bechor?
You're asking about Bechor L'Nachala.
No, I understand, but my point is that he has two wives, so he's still a man, so it's from him. Right. So he has a Bechor from one wife, he just doesn't have a Bechor from the other wife.
Well, there are different dinim of Bechor for different things, but yeah, I mean, if you're talking about Bechor L'Aviv.
No, because now it's questioning that maybe it was the Bechor Imo. The Bechor from the mother could still be a child of the father, and consequently, maybe it should be considered the Bechor of the father also.
But it's not the first child of the father. It's the first child of the mother. But the Gemara is saying Bechor Le'im doesn't matter because the mother is... Yeah. But the next question is, so then the Gemara says, maybe if there's a Bechor, then even a Pashut can be Miyabim. But if there's no Bechor, then nobody can be Miyabim. Does that make sense? That's originally the Gemara said maybe only a Bechor can be Miyabim. The Gemara said that can't be because we exclude Achiv Shaloya Bolamo. But Achiv Shahaya Bolamo is obviously a potential Yabam. So now the Gemara says, yeah, maybe if there's a Bechor, then all the children that are alive at the same time are candidates for Yibum. But if there's no Bechor at all, maybe nobody can do Yibum. Does that make sense?
If you want to interpret Bechor literally, yes.
But why then? Why would the presence of a Bechor matter if the Bechor himself didn't have to be the Yavam? It does make sense. I just want to explain why. The answer is
because of Nachla.
No. No.
Bechor is
the idea is as follows.
Bechor is the stand-in for the father, right?
The what?
Bechor is the stand-in for the father.
Kind of, or at least he has a special...
It's a legacy issue again, coming in.
Exactly. So what the idea would be as follows. If there's a Bechor in the family, then this expanded family obligation to the Yavama applies. That's what the Gemara thought. If there is a Bechor, so the Bechor is obligated. Once he's obligated, his brothers can take it off his hands if he can't do it. But if there's no Bechor to begin with, that it should be devolved, that this obligation should devolve upon him, right, then there's not going to be any Yibam at all. Meaning the presence of a Bechor changes the dynamic in terms of expanded family obligation.
Do you have
Once
any
he has
evidence?
suspended family obligation, then his brothers have to pitch into.
Do we have any evidence in the Talmud that there is an advantage to having a titular bechor? I mean, in fact, the Gemara sometimes says that a girl firstborn is a good sign for.
It's not an advantage. It just is a part of the family. It's an important element in the family dynamic. I mean, we know it in terms of nachla, right? Anyways, so let's continue it. So the Gemara basically, you see what's going on in the Gemara? The Gemara is saying, how can you just ignore the word bechor in the pasuk? They're trying to find different ways.
And this is the same Gemara that turned around the whole pshuto shel mikra of the.
Yeah.
And they're worried about the bechor. No,
it's the same problem. It's the same issue.
They changed the whole reading of the pasuk.
I'll explain in a minute what I think it's all about. So the Gemara says, Amar Kro, Meis Echad Mehem. Mila Skinim the Meis Bechor. The Gemara is saying, no one ever said that the case of Yibum wouldn't apply if the Bechor himself was the one who died. So it can't be that you need a Bechor in order for there to be Yibum for anybody. V'am Rachmana liyabim. Liyabim katan. So the Gemara says, Ve'ema de Meis katan. V'am Rachmana liyabim Bechor. Maybe we're talking about a case where the younger brother died and the Bechor is the one who's going to be miyabed. Says the Gemara, like we said before. So listen to this. Then the Gemara, they don't want to give up. So the Gemara says, Ema kileka Bechor kidem katan zacha, the ika Bechor kidem katan lo zacha. Remember, the Mishnah says that the mitzvah begadol, we prefer that the gadol do the yibum. But if the katan was kidem v'zacha, if the katan, pushes his way in and does it, it'll work. So the Gemara says maybe that's only if there's no bechor. But if there's a bechor, then the katan can't usurp. He can usurp an older brother, but he can't usurp the bechor, meaning special yichus, special chiyuv for the bechor. Amar Kra says the pasuk, ki yeshu achim yachdav. Hukshu yeshivas achim zelazeh. Then the Gemara tries another time. The ema kiika bechor li hadar agadol, kileka bechor ein chozer neitz agadol. Maybe the lekatchila, the priority of a gadol, maybe it's not just if it's a gadol. Maybe it's only if it's a bechor. In other words, if there's no bechor, then everybody's equal. Just like I was saying for the Rambam. In fact, if there's no,
so far would support the Rambam's viewpoint, no?
In a way, if there's no acha gadol, but we're saying it by bechor, so it's not. Says the Gemara, Alama Tani Abayik Shisha Mitzvah Begadol Liyabim, Lo Ratza Hochem Eitzel Achiv Akatan, Lo Ratza Chozer Eitzel Agadol, Ke Bechor. Ma Bechor Bechoraso Garmalo, Av Gadol Gdulaso Garmalo. It sounds like it's a din in Gadol, not a din in Bechor. So the Gemara rejects this. There are like 5-6 attempts here of the Gemara to try to suggest that Bechor is a factor one way or another when it comes to Yibum. Says the Gemara, another idea. Ve'ema kimiyabim Bechor lishkol nachla. Kimiyabim pashut lo lishkol nachla. Maybe the idea is that if the Bechor is miyabim, he gets the nachla of the mace from the father.
That is a fact.
But if a regular gadol, not a bechor, is miyabim, he doesn't get the extra money. So what's the idea? That qualitatively, right, the yibum of a bechor is not only preferable, but is different. Says the Gemara, no, it's not true. Amar Kra yakum al shem achiv, varikum. So the Gemara says, "V'ala b'chor dekor yerachmana l'may hilchasa."
The Yavam would also get a pishnayim from the brother if he died.
1 second. No, he doesn't get. What do you mean? Say that again.
In other words, the father's still alive.
Yeah.
The older brother dies. Later on,
you mean the
second brother makes yibum, and the father then dies. Would he get the pishnayim from the?
I think so. Yeah, he should, because that's the chelik that belongs to him. Anyway, l'may hilchasa ligriyusa. Ma bechor enanoto baroi kibamuksak apai enanoto baroi kibamuksak. Finally, the Gemara comes to the conclusion. We just read an Amud of Gemara, but finally, the Gemara comes to the conclusion that the reason that the word bechor is used in the pasuk is to indicate that just like a bechor, when he gets a double portion, the special din that when a bechor gets a double portion, his double portion only applies what we call matsui, what's in the estate of the father at the time that he dies. But ra'ui, anything that is slated to come into the estate later, like let's say there's some outstanding, let's say the father was owed money, so those outstanding debts that ultimately will come into the estate, there's no chelik bechora on those. The chelik bechora is limited to the assets in the estate at the moment of Misa Sabal. So what the Gemara is saying is, since we call a Yavam a Bechor, even though he really isn't one, what we're really trying to say is that the Nachala that he would get of the mace, right, is limited to the mace's portion at the time of the death, not anything that would come into the estate afterwards.
So then he cannot inherit the father's of Mishnayim if the father is still alive.
No, you asked me something else. If the father is alive, and then what about will the Yavam get the Chelek HaMeis if the Chelek HaMeis is a Chelek Bechora?
So now he not only is not going to get the Chelek Bechora,
he will
get the Chelek HaMeis, period, because it
wasn't
at that time.
He just doesn't get. He gets the Chelek Bechora and he gets the Chelek of the Chelek HaMeis. He only doesn't get items that come into the estate after the death.
Yeah,
only
so,
items.
So if the father dies after the brother,
yeah.
Now the brother would be entitled to.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying, that's a good question. I'm not sure about that. 1 second. Meaning he gets his own.
But it's not physically in the estate at that time.
He gets his own portion and he gets his brother's portion when the father dies.
Why?
But only at the moment when the father dies. Only what's in the estate at the moment when the father dies.
But let's say the brother is owed $1,000, which should be stronger than
not the brother. No,
the dead brother.
We're talking about him.
You said when he's owed money, that old money doesn't go to the Yavam.
We're talking about the Yavam inheriting the brother's nachla from the father.
No, but first we're talking about is inheriting the nachla period of the brother. So we're saying
no.
That brother's estate, if he's owed money, is that included in the nachla that he gets?
I think we're only talking about what the brother is entitled to receive from the father.
Oh, okay.
And that is, I think the point is that is frozen. That estate, the assets of that estate are frozen at the moment
of death.
Of the father's death, not what will come later, like debts and other things like that. Okay, so let me tell you what I think. We have to finish in a minute. Let me tell you what I think is going on here. So what are the problems that we're dealing with? And the next time we'll continue with the Ramban and Rashi and so on. And Parshas Vayeshev and Yehuda and Tamar. That's what we'll do next week. Yirtzeh Hashem. So this is very strange. I mean, you have a pasuk. It makes it seem like it's talking about the legacy of the deceased to his son. And the psukim are saying it's all about the brother. Right? And that normally, ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. But here you have a special, there's a cause of afikte, and it's not even the regular status of pshat. In addition to that, the Gemara uses the Torah uses the expression bechor. It really means gadol ha'achim. And then the Gemara has like 6 different suggestions, right? 6, 7 suggestions to suggest maybe there is a special yichus if there is a bechor, involved. And finally, the Gemara ends up saying, no, it's there to explain something else. But what I'd like to suggest is as follows, and that is going back to what we began with, Ki yeshvu achim yachta. The bigger idea here is that it's the gadol achim, even though it's not a bechor, he's acting like a bechor, because the obligation of yibum is not just a technicality, about Eishes Hameis. It's really about the family's obligation to secure, both the future of one of the wives, thereby the legacy of the deceased brother, and especially in the absence of an heir. So what the shot is still correct, meaning, and this is, I think, what you were saying before. The goal here, is to secure the continuity and the legacy of the mace. But instead of saying, "Oh, that's done superficially," by naming the child, Mace Jr., right? What we're saying is that the oldest brother, a kind of a bechor in this context, representing the totality of the family, which is why, the gadol is miyabim. Of course, if the katan is, kidem zacha, but it's really the obligation of the gadol, and it's in lieu of, even though he isn't actually a bechor, the Torah is using the phrase bechor to signify the gadol, as if to say, we're not just picking out, a candidate. What we're trying to explain is that the choice and the preference of the older brother is part of Ki yeshvu achim yachdav. It's part of this, joint responsibility that the family has to secure, the continuity of the deceased brother and of at least one of the wives. So even though the pshat, has been eclipsed by Chazal telling us that, which brother, only if it can produce, only from a wife that can produce a child, not the name, but the nachala. Those are the practical steps, but conceptually, the goal remains the pshat, which is lahakim shem la'achiv, through the child. So both are really still true. So if this is the case, again, going back to what we began with, then the whole institution of Yibum and Zika, the suspension of Eishes Ach, all of these things are an indication, that this marriage and family responsibility is very extensive. And it goes well beyond the bilateral relationship of the husband and the wife. If that's the case, so we can understand, again, the psuk, why it starts Ki yeshvu achim, it's yachdav, leaving her fate to other people is hachutza, it's an izar. The brothers, and the older brother in particular, is playing the role of a bechor, right? And the goal is, to ensure the continuity of the legacy of this Yaakam al Shem Achiv Ames, V'lo Yimachesh Shemo Mi Yisrael. So it's interesting, if you look at the Ramban, we'll finish with this. The Ramban is particularly adamant, that it's not about naming, as Rashi noted already. But the Ramban spells it out here, and then next week we'll read the Ramban in Bereshis, in Parshas Vayesha. The Ramban says, "Inan hayibum v'yisod." This is on page 1. "Inan hayibum v'sodo v'hachalitza v'tama." Right, the secret behind yibum and the reasoning behind chalitza. So it's because I've mentioned them already in Bereshis, meaning in Parshas Vayeshev, we'll read it next week. The Ramban's view, I'll tell you now, is typically, the Ramban was a Makubal. He was a mystic. He was a Kabbalist. And in his Perush al Torah, the Ramban, often mentions what we call al derech ha'emes, what he calls al derech ha'emes. Al derech ha'emes is Kabbalah. It's the mystical tradition. However, it's very, 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 very rare in the Ramban's commentary, even al Torah, that a mystical interpretation or a mystical perspective is the main perspective that he presents. What we'll see in Parshas Vayeshev and Bereshis is that Yibum is an exception to that rule. The Rambam really believes that the nefesh of the mace is somehow enhanced through Yibum, what are called Gilgul Neshamos. So this is what he means when he says, Inyan HaYibum B'Sodo, it's secret, V'chalitza V'tama, Kfar Iskartim. But we'll see. So then the Ramban explains, with this we'll finish, V'tam haya b'char shartele dakum al shem achiv ames, einenu kipshuto sheikaru abein arishon b'shem ames, Ruvain o Shimon kamo. Don't think it's the pshat, which means we're going to name this child Ruvain, Shimon, something like that. Shaharei, the Boaz, in the Rus story of Boaz, right? Ne'amar chen, v'lo yikares shem ames me'im achav, the mace was, the first husband of Rus was Machlon, but the child's name wasn't Machlon; it was Ovad. So what do we mean then when we say, like, Lo Yikarei Shem Ames or Yakum Shem Achiv Hameh? What does it mean? Says the Ramban, you have to look at the Ramban and Bereshis, but I'm just giving you the heads up. He says, Avala Katuv al derech emes, that's the Rambam's code word for Kabbalah, the Havtacha. What the Torah is telling you is, if you do Yibum properly, this will secure the spiritual continuity or future of the mace, al derech emes. V'hinei, he says, hu kipshuto. Here, the Kabbalah, the Derech HaEmes, is the Pshat. It's a very remarkable thing. The Samchu Bo Rabboseinu, Medrash, Shehei Gadol Ha'achem Miyabim, referring to the Gemara in Yevamos, as you can see, on Chav Daled Amud Aleph, that the older brother should do the Yibum. That's the Medrash, that's the Torah Shabbal Peh. And that a woman who doesn't have the capacity to bear children, she cannot be misyabemes. He says, even though it's not the pshat, and even though it's actually not even the drasha, because he thinks it's even more than a drasha. For the Ramban, since the whole thing is about Gilgul Neshamos, so if he was a saris or she was an islandess, there would be nothing to talk about. And therefore, it's not even a medra, it's not even the Torah Shabbal Peh. He says even that's an asmachta, it's obvious. Just part of the definition of what Yibum is.
Just because the woman is an island, it doesn't mean that he's not left in the same condition, the brother that died, that he has no legacy.
Say that one more time.
In other words, just
but there'll be no child.
Huh?
There'll be no child.
No. Oh, you mean? I mean, if oh yeah.
But if you look at the Ramban in Bereshis, I'm not going to read it now. But if you look at the Ramban in Bereshis, that's what we're going to pick up with next time. So Rashi in Bereshis, even though Rashi here says like the Gemara in Yevamos, that Yokim al Shem Achiv means nachla or a legacy. It doesn't mean the name. But in Vayeshev, in the story of Yehuda and Tamar, right, and Yehuda turns to Onan, the brother of Er, and says, be miyabem your brother, lahakim zera la'achicha, there Rashi says it means give him the name. And there the Ramban argues and says, how could you say that? It's against the Gemara in Yevamos. And don't tell me that post-Matan Torah is any different than pre-Matan Torah. So and that's the Ramban that I was referring. Yeah. So I want to pick up with the Ramban's view of the Yehuda and Tamar story next week.
And
some of the other assumption.
The Chazal say the childless person is like a mace or something. Is that tie into that?
Right. Because it doesn't have continuity.
Yeah.
Rabbi, may I ask you a quick question, please?
Sure.
At the beginning of the shiur, you brought various reasons why Yevamos is first and not other Masechtos.
Right.
Why not to go into simplicity and to say, let's take all the psukim in the Torah and go chronologically. This is the reason why we start here and not there and this and that and the other.
What do you mean? I'm not understanding. What do you mean chronologically?
Let's see, which is the first posuk on the issues of issues?
So the Tosas Yeshanim, the third answer of the Tosas Yeshanim is that the first example in the Torah of a kind of whatever issue is Yehuda and Tamar.
It's Yehuda and Tamar, that is true, but okay, yeah.
That's what you're saying. But I think that, that's one of the answers Tosas Yeshanim gives, you're right. But I think a better answer is the answer. I'm biased. That's my answer. is the idea that there's something very unique about the obligations of Yibum, understood in a bigger way, that really underscore the potential, and the expanse of what marriage and family is all about.
I think I told you once before, Rabbi, I don't remember, that at the beginning of my career in Johannesburg, I was walking the street. The whole neighborhood was the Jewish neighborhood. Today it's nothing, but whatever. And I was walking past the Beth Din, going back to my apartment, and the secretary of the Beth Din was standing outside, and he was going crazy. He needed a third one for a Beth Din. For the Chalitza, of course. So that was the only time I experienced.
Wow.
The woman was so bitter.
Oh, really?
She was so bitter. I don't know who they were. I never met them before, never met them after. But it was not a very pleasant thing. The Chalitza.
Well, I recently went to one about 2 years ago in the Bezin of America. They try to do a very professional job, but it's a very and try to make it as, I wouldn't say pleasant, but as comfortable as possible.
Of course.
But, the ceremony itself is a very complicated.
Sure,
the feelings are very the feelings are very raw, and they're very complex, and it's very hard. Yeah. Anyways, have a wonderful week, everybody, and we're continuing on schedule for now. And next week we'll continue with this introduction. We'll discuss the psukim in Vayeshev and a few other things, and then after that we'll hopefully, get back into the regular Gemaras as well. But today we did Chaf Daled, so it's not so bad.
Yesher koach.
Have a good week, everyone.